structure there. The crucifixion, of course. How Jesus gathered his disciples. And then there was a surprising place out there where an actor portraying Christ appeared to be walking on water. Now I'll tell you, it was really more of an Arkansas stream than the Sea of Galilee, but it was effective. I've never forgotten it. You see, walking on water is really special. And in Matthew's Gospel, it was more than just special effects. I mean, we watched this guy in Arkansas and we tried to figure out where he was placing his feet. And they must have structures just under the water so he wouldn't fall in. But, you know, in the Bible, it's more than just special effects. It was faith affirming. Well, friends, we are probably more familiar with the Lake of the Ozarks than we are with the Sea of Galilee. So I want us to check the map. And we looked at this last week. You can see that red dot where the town of Capernaum is. So I always think that kind of looks like a fist. And so I just use my fist as an example. If this is the Sea of Galilee, the Jordan River drains on down to my elbow where the Dead Sea is. We're not going there today. But anyway, Capernaum, the fishing village where Peter lived with his family and where Jesus stayed, that's up here on the northwest kind of. And then the place where they were going to, Gennesaret, was on the eastern side, where Jordan is now. The Sea of Galilee is 13 miles from north to south, so from my knuckles to my wrist. And then it's about 8 miles at its widest point from east to west. It has a surface area of 41,000 acres. Now that compares to 54,000 acres at Lake of the Ozark. And you know Lake of the Ozark is totally different. They call it the Dragon Lake, the way it bends around and everything. So this is more of a lake. It's, now we know, it's 141 feet deep at its deepest place compared to 130 feet at Lake of the Ozarks. Well, in biblical times, nobody knew how deep this lake or sea was. We call it the Sea of Galilee, but it's also called Lake Tiberias, and there's a couple of other different names. I'm going to use Sea of Galilee for us today. And what they would do is that they would tie some weights onto ropes, tie them all together, measure them, and drop them down. So it was deeper than any of these ropes could measure. And so that's why some people believe that the Sea of Galilee was unfathomable. It's endlessly deep. And what they really thought was that there was an opening way down in the deepest part that opened to the underworld. That's important. We're going to come back to that. Well, when you read your Bible, you'll know there's many stories in the Bible about the Gospels of Jesus and the disciples taking a boat across the lake. That's a pretty big boat with big nets, but you get the idea. Taking a boat across that lake was often the fastest way to get around, but I suspect that Jesus just also really liked being out on the water. I like to be out on the water. I don't know if you do as well, but I just find it really invigorating and exciting. There's something about traveling across the Sea of Galilee in a boat that is calming and renewing to the soul. And I got to experience this in 2009. I went with a group of Methodists from around the state of Missouri, and we went to the Holy Land. And we got to experience a boat ride on the Sea of Galilee. And it was both exciting and very peaceful. So let me talk just a bit more about these boats, and you'll see one in just a moment. So I found out through doing some research that the common boat on the Lake of the Ozarks is about 25 feet long. Anybody got one of those? Anybody want to let me borrow? No, I don't see that today. All right. Well, it holds about 13 people, and I've been on a few of those boats, and they're a lot of fun. Um, what I didn't know is that it's almost exactly the size that they think the boats used on the Sea of Galilee in biblical times. It's almost exactly the same size. And in 1986, one of those ancient boats was found. This was a year that it was very dry. There was a drought, and so the water level dropped, and there was a lot of mud that was usually covered up. And two brothers were exploring, and they saw some pieces of wood sticking out. And they found this ancient boat. Here's a picture of it. They call it the Jesus boat. It's in a museum there. If you go to Sea of Galilee and Capernaum is here, the museum is probably it's on this side, on the west side of the lake, and it's really a neat place to go. But an archaeologist dated this boat from anywhere from 50 BC to 50 AD. So they kind of got a 100-year range, but it's right around the time that Jesus lived. This boat is 27 feet long. It's 7.5 feet wide, and it holds about 13 people. Now, this could operate with a single mast sail or by the work of 4 oarsmen. So you can kind of get a picture of what that would have looked like. And now, how many times have you heard of Simon and Andrew and James and John fishing? There's your 4 oarsmen, right? Well, Simon Peter, had spent nearly his entire life on the Sea of Galilee. He had logged thousands of hours in boats like this one, fishing and sailing across the lake. But on the occasion of our story, Simon would have an experience unlike any he'd ever had before. Now, in the Bible, the Gospels of Matthew and Mark and John all tell the story of a storm at sea with some variations. But it's only Matthew's account that includes Simon Peter walking on the water. So, remember when I read from the Bible and it said, right then, Jesus made the disciples get into a boat. So here's what had just happened. His cousin John the Baptizer had just had his head cut off. He'd just been executed by Herod. And instead of taking some time to grieve, the crowds pressed in on Jesus, and then we have this wonderful story of him feeding this crowd of 5,000 people. So he takes care, he has compassion for them, he takes care of them, he feeds them. And then finally, Jesus says to the disciples, get in the boat, go on, go to the next place, take a break. And then he went up on the mountain to pray. So finally, he gets to pray, talk to God, grieve his friend and cousin John. And he just needed some time to be alone for all of that. Well, meanwhile, things did not go as planned for the disciples. They were out on the lake fighting a strong headwind, and then there was a storm, and so they were being battered by the strong wind and the waves, and they were way far out from land, but they weren't across the lake. They weren't any closer to their destination. This journey should have only taken the disciples a couple of hours, but the storm blew them off course and was buffeting them with the wind and the waves. Now, one of the things I learned on my trip to Israel is that storms on the Sea of Galilee come up very suddenly, and they can be very strong. It's something to do with how there's hills or mountains on the east side of this lake, and more plains, and there's mountains, but they're further away on the east side, and so somehow the winds are just able to converge, and you might be out there on a beautiful sunny day, and all of a sudden you're in a storm. Well, friends, think of this. That's literally how storms come up on this lake. But also, metaphorically, Anytime you are reading in the Bible about a storm, it can be a metaphor for the chaos in our lives. It can be a symbol for, we're just going along, it's a lovely day, and then all of a sudden we get a phone call. And somebody we know and love has died. Or it's a call from our doctor's office with dire news. Or, something big has happened and we didn't see it coming. So anytime you're reading and there's a storm, it indicates some kind of chaos in our lives. So here's these 12 disciples. They are a long way from their destination. It was nighttime, and they were afraid for their lives. And then their fear turned to terror, and then it got worse. So Jesus knew that the disciples were struggling, and they needed help, and he came to help. So Matthew continues telling us his version of the story. Very early in the morning, you can see the sun just starting to rise. Jesus came to his disciples walking on the lake. And when the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. And they said, "It's a ghost." They were so frightened that they were screaming. And then we have Jesus, and his calm, peaceful voice breaks through and said, "Be encouraged. It's me. Do not be afraid." Well, why were they terrified when they saw Jesus, their friend Jesus, walking on the water? Remember what I said earlier about they thought that the bottom of the lake was a portal to the underground? They assumed that this was a spirit or a ghost. This tradition that the bottom of the Sea of Galilee was a portal to the realm of the dead. The disciples were already scared, but now they were terrified because it appeared that a spirit had escaped from the underworld, and perhaps that spirit had come to take them to the realm of the dead, meaning they were about to go under. And then just then, Jesus speaks up. And I love his words. I used to know them in Latin. I only remember a part of them now, but I love the English words. Be encouraged. It's me. I'm here. Don't be afraid. See, the gospel writers wanted the readers to see Jesus coming to his disciples in their hour of need. He was watching over them, even when they couldn't see him. Does that ring true for us? Yeah. Because just like that, Jesus continues to come to us in the storms of our lives, climbs into our boat, and rides out the storm with us. And so we are meant to recognize in these stories that this is a metaphor for what happens in our own lives. We experience storms in our lives, and they can terrify us if we allow ourselves to face them alone. So that's how most of the gospel writers tell the story. They leave it there. Peter stepping out of the boat is only told in Matthew's gospel, not in Mark or John, and Luke doesn't touch this story. So we get that lesson about Jesus coming to us in our hour of need. Matthew doesn't leave it there. He has this incident about Peter. See, Peter sees Jesus. All of them see Jesus. And they think it's a ghost. And then they get the reassurance. Jesus is with them. But when everyone else is too scared or too confused to respond, Peter took the lead. Only Peter thought to himself, if Jesus can walk on water, maybe I can do it too. So I want you to notice something important here. And you might want to go read this story for yourself this week in Matthew chapter 14. Peter didn't just call out to Jesus and then step out of the boat. He if we don't slow down and notice that, we think, hey, Peter gets the big idea and he gets out. But no, Jesus says, come. Peter didn't trust in his own ability to walk on the water, but he trusted that if Jesus said he could, he could. Friends, this is important for us. Even if Matthew hadn't identified him, I think we probably could have figured out, knowing what we know about the disciples, knowing what we know about Peter's personality, we could have figured out which one of the 12 would have pulled this stunt. We know other stories of it. Peter's always the impetuous one, the one that says things